Welcome back. We are on day 19 of this war, and today I want to talk about energy. Not oil prices as an abstract economic statistic, not a number on a trading screen. I want to talk about what is actually happening to the physical infrastructure that heats European homes, powers Japanese factories, keeps South Korean industry running, and supplies the global LNG market that the entire modern economy depends on. Because what Iran did to Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city in the last 48 hours is not a military story. It is an economic event of historic proportions, and virtually every major claim being made about it from every direction requires careful verification. Let's start with the confirmed facts. Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued an official statement saying the country strongly condemns the blatant Iranian attack targeting Ras Laffan industrial city, which caused fires resulting in significant damage to the facility. CNBC, that is Qatar's own government speaking, not Iranian state media, not Israeli intelligence. Qatar itself confirmed the attack and described it as significant damage. QatarEnergy said Wednesday that its Ras Laffan LNG hub had sustained extensive damage after being attacked by Iranian missiles twice in 12 hours. CNBC twice in 12 hours. The same facility struck twice in a single day. And then QatarEnergy's CEO, Saad Al-Kaabi, provided the single most alarming specific figure of this entire energy crisis. QatarEnergy CEO Saad Al-Kaabi said the Iran attack took out 17% of the country's liquefied natural gas export capacity. TV every day. 17% of Qatar's LNG export capacity destroyed in a single attack. Qatar supplies approximately 20% of the entire world's LNG. Do that math. 17% of 20% of global supply. That is not a regional energy story. That is a global energy emergency. Now, let me tell you what Ras Laffan actually is, because the name appears in financial headlines without most people understanding what this facility represents structurally to the world economy. The Ras Laffan industrial city covers an area of 295 square kilometers, roughly one-third the size of New York City. In addition to LNG processing, it also houses gas-to-liquids plants, LNG storage facilities, condensate splitting units, and an oil refinery. Wikipedia. This is not a pipeline. This is not a shipping terminal. This is a city-sized industrial complex that converts natural gas into the liquefied form that can be loaded onto tankers and shipped to Europe, Japan, South Korea, China, and India. When it stops working, those tankers have nothing to carry. And when those tankers have nothing to carry, the countries that depend on them have nothing to burn. The Ras Laffan complex produces about 20% of the global LNG supply, and there is no viable alternative export route for this LNG. NBC News. No viable alternative. That phrase deserves to sit with you for a moment. In a world where Germany has been scrambling for LNG since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, where European storage levels are at a 5-year low below 30%, where the continent needs to inject nearly 60 billion cubic meters of gas during the upcoming refill season just to meet EU regulatory minimums, there is no viable alternative export route for Qatari LNG. Every tanker that cannot load at Ras Laffan is a tanker that Europe, Japan, South Korea, and India cannot replace on short notice. Let's look at what the markets did the moment this news broke, because the numbers are unprecedented, and they tell you everything about how serious this is. The front-month gas price at the Dutch title transfer facility, the European benchmark for natural gas trading, traded up over 16.5% at 63.7 euros per megawatt hour. International benchmark. Brent crude futures rose more than 3% to over $111 a barrel, having briefly climbed above $119 earlier in the session. TV every day. Brent crude above $119. That is the highest oil price the world has seen in years. And European natural gas prices have now doubled since the war began on February 28th. In Europe, benchmark natural gas prices surged 16.7% on the day, having soared 25% at one point, and have now doubled since the war began on February 28th. CNBC doubled in 19 days. The entire European energy crisis of 2022 following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The crisis that pushed governments to emergency measures, that triggered energy rationing discussions, that caused the largest single-day gas price spikes since the modern trading era, took months to develop. This one took 19 days. Now I want to fact-check the framing that is being used by some analysts and officials to minimize this development. The argument goes like this. Ras Laffan had already halted production on March 2nd after the first Iranian drone attack. Therefore, the latest strikes do not represent a new supply shock because the supply was already offline. That framing is technically accurate, but strategically misleading, and here is why. The damage to the Ras Laffan hub fundamentally alters the global gas market outlook. According to Mackenzie, a data and analytics company focusing on energy and natural resources, which said in a note that disruption to global natural gas supply was now likely to last longer than 2 months. CNBC. The difference between a temporary production halt and extensive physical damage to infrastructure is the difference between weeks of disruption and months of disruption. A facility that stopped producing because of a safety precaution can restart relatively quickly when conditions allow. A facility that has sustained extensive damage twice in 12 hours requires physical repair of industrial infrastructure. An energy analyst at MST Marquee said the attacks on Ras Laffan could cause a long-term global gas shortage, adding that, even with a swift resolution of the conflict, extensive physical damage means restoration of full capacity could take weeks or months. Wikipedia. European gas contracts have already risen by more than 70% since the start of the Iran war, while Asian LNG futures contracts have jumped by 88%. Wikipedia, 88%. Asian LNG futures up 88% in 19 days. Japan imports virtually all of its energy. South Korea imports virtually all of its energy. These are not abstractions. These price movements translate directly into electricity bills, industrial operating costs, and government emergency spending in some of the world's largest and most sophisticated economies. Now, let's talk about the diplomatic consequence of this attack, because it produced something that has no precedent in the 19 days of this war. Qatar's foreign ministry declared the Iranian embassy's military and security attachés as persona non grata, along with their staff, demanding they leave Qatar within 24 hours, saying the decision came as a result of Iran's repeated attacks. CNBC persona non grata. Qatar expelled Iranian military and security diplomats from its territory. Qatar is a country that has historically maintained some of the most carefully balanced relationships in the Gulf, hosting the largest American military base in the Middle East at Al Udeid, while simultaneously maintaining functioning diplomatic channels with Iran, Turkey, and various other regional actors. Qatar is also the country that has been hosting Hamas political leadership and serving as one of the primary back-channel diplomatic conduits in the Middle East for years. When Qatar expels Iranian military diplomats, it is not just a bilateral statement. It is a signal about the limits of Iranian pressure, even on the states that have tried hardest to stay out of this conflict. Qatar's foreign ministry said it considers the assault a dangerous escalation, a flagrant violation of its sovereignty, and a direct threat to its national security, adding that Iran continues its escalatory policies that are pushing the region toward the brink and drawing countries not party to this crisis into the conflict zone. CNBC countries not party to this crisis. That is Qatar formally stating on the record that it is not a party to this war, that it does not consider itself a legitimate target, and that Iran is dragging it into a conflict it has not chosen. That diplomatic framing matters enormously for what comes next. French President Emmanuel Macron moved immediately after the Ras Laffan strike in a way that signals how alarmed European governments are about what is happening to their energy supply. Macron said he had spoken to Qatar's emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and U.S. President Donald Trump following the attacks, calling for immediate implementation of a moratorium on strikes targeting civilian infrastructure, particularly energy and water supply facilities. CNBC Macron is not calling for a ceasefire. He is not demanding negotiations. He is calling for a moratorium specifically on energy infrastructure strikes. That is a French president essentially telling the United States and Israel and Iran that Europe's energy security is now a direct casualty of this war and that something must be done about it before the continent faces a catastrophic supply crisis heading into summer refilling season. Europe is entering the critical period when underground gas storage must be replenished ahead of winter. Yet European countries are beginning this process in one of the weakest positions in years, with storage levels currently below 30%, a 5-year low. NBC News below 30% storage. The EU requires member states to reach 90% capacity by December. Given current conditions, Europe will need to inject nearly 60 billion cubic meters of gas during the upcoming refill season just to meet this target. NBC News. And the facility that supplies 20% of the world's LNG ice and which Europe has come to depend on as its primary alternative to Russian pipeline gas has just sustained extensive physical damage twice in 12 hours. The broader strategic picture of Iran's energy targeting campaign is now visible, and it is deliberate. Iran warned specifically before these strikes that it would target Qatar's Mesaieed petrochemical complex and Ras Laffan refinery, Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery and Jubail petrochemical complex, and the UAE's Al Hawzan gas field. It then struck exactly those targets. This is not indiscriminate bombing. Iran published a targeting list and then executed it. A defense studies lecturer at King's College London told Al Jazeera that Iran knows exactly what it is doing by attacking Gulf countries, noting these countries have less of an appetite for a fight because at the end of the day this is not their war, adding that Iran is banking that they will want a ceasefire as soon as possible and will be pressuring the Trump administration. TV Guide. That strategic logic is now being tested in real time. The Arab League's foreign ministers meeting in Riyadh, which was supposed to focus on finding a diplomatic off-ramp from the conflict, is now dominated by the immediate aftermath of the energy infrastructure strikes. Every Gulf state government sitting in that room in Riyadh watched Ras Laffan burn on their news feeds before they took their seats. Saudi Arabia's air defenses intercepted 4 ballistic missiles launched towards Riyadh, as well as 2 launched towards the country's eastern region on Wednesday. The UAE's defense ministry said its air defenses dealt with 13 ballistic missiles and 27 drones coming from Iran. Operations were suspended at the Habshan gas facility after 2 incidents of fallen debris following successful interception of a missile. The Bab oil field was also targeted. CNBC Saudi Arabia's Riyadh under ballistic missile attack. UAE gas facilities disrupted. And Trump's response to all of this was to threaten Wednesday night to blow up South Pars, Iran's critical domestic electricity supply facility, if attacks on Qatar continued. Trump threatened Wednesday night to blow up South Pars, critical to Iran's domestic electricity supply, if attacks on Qatar continued. CNBC. An American president threatening to bomb a country's electricity supply in response to that country bombing a gas export facility. The escalation ladder now has no visible ceiling. Here is where the facts leave us. Iran struck Ras Laffan twice in 12 hours, destroying 17% of Qatar's LNG export capacity. European natural gas prices have doubled since the war began. Asian LNG futures are up 88%. Brent crude briefly hit $119 a barrel. Qatar expelled Iranian military diplomats. Wood Mackenzie says the disruption will last more than 2 months. European storage is at a 5-year low below 30%. Macron called for an immediate energy infrastructure moratorium. Saudi Arabia's Riyadh was hit by ballistic missiles. UAE gas operations were suspended. Trump threatened to bomb Iran's electricity supply. And the Arab League foreign ministers sat down in Riyadh to discuss a diplomatic off-ramp, while their own energy infrastructure burned. This war began as a military conflict. It has now become an energy crisis of historic proportions for every country on Earth. We will keep verifying every number. We will keep fact-checking every claim. Stay with us.